Hey guys, tonight we're heading into a place where talking is forbidden, but brewing beer is encouraged, a medieval monastery. You'll walk through silent cloisters with your breath clouding in the cold morning air, surrounded by stone walls and solemn routines. You're here to brew ale, not for a party, but as a sacred task handed down by saints and sleepy cellarers. Your world is ruled by bells, old books, and rules written before soap was widely appreciated. You probably won't survive this unless you really like silence, scratchy robes, and fermenting smells. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You step into the cloister just as dawn peeks through a cloud-smudged sky. The only sound your own soft footsteps against cold flagstones. The walls are thick and the air smells faintly of candle wax and ancient dust. It's quiet, not peaceful quiet, but the kind of quiet that feels like a rule you're breaking just by breathing too loud. You're surrounded by monks who've taken vows of silence, so even when someone stubs a toe on a threshold, they just grimace like a medieval mime and hobble on. No grumbling, no chatting, just a silence thick enough to bottle. The silence isn't just for show. According to the rule of Saint Benedict, monks are meant to avoid idle words. That includes complaining, joking, and yes, even small talk about the weather, which, let's be honest, probably hasn't changed much since 1142. You glance to your left. A brother nods slightly in greeting. A high honor in this place. You nod back, almost reverently. The whole building hums with quiet purpose. Every monk here knows exactly what they're meant to do, and exactly when they're meant to do it. They don't speak it aloud, but it's written in their faces, in their folded hands, in the disciplined shuffle of their sandals. Historians still argue whether the vow of silence was intended to enhance spiritual focus or just keep Brother Wilfred from endlessly talking about turnip yields. Regardless, it stuck. And you, novice though you are, must learn to communicate through eye contact, subtle gestures, and the occasional exaggerated shrug. As you pass under a Romanesque arch, the bell tower strikes a slow, deliberate toll. Not a peal, not a ding-dong, just a single, somber bong. This isn't a wake-up call. This is a command. You stop walking. Everyone stops. Like birds freezing mid-flight, the monks collectively acknowledge the bell before continuing in perfect harmony. Even the squirrels outside probably know when to freeze. Some say the silence sharpens your hearing. That's partly true. You now hear everything. The scrape of sandals, the rustle of habits, the gurgle of someone's very hungry stomach. Someone's always hungry here. You pass through the scriptorium, where other monks are copying manuscripts in dim candlelight. You try not to sneeze from the dust. In one corner, someone is illuminating a manuscript with gold leaf, tongue poking out in concentration. You want to ask what he's painting. Maybe it's a dragon, or maybe it's a nun slapping a demon with a Bible. But you can't. Silence. Even your thoughts start slowing down here. Not in a bad way, just decelerating. You don't need to respond. You don't need to come up with anything clever. No one's waiting for a punchline. That's oddly freeing. Eventually, you reach the door to the brewhouse, a low stone arch framed by ivy and mist. The door creaks open, not because it's haunted, but because Brother Thomas still refuses to oil the hinges for spiritual discipline. You step inside, and the warm, damp scent of yeast wraps around you like a wool cloak. The other monks are already there, moving like ghosts with very specific tasks. One stirs a vat, one checks a fire, none say a word. Welcome to your new world. No talking, no complaining, and no Wi-Fi, but plenty of beer. You shuffle awake in the dark, your body not yet convinced that the sun will ever rise again. The mattress, if you can call it that, is a lumpy sack of straw with a fabric cover that scratches like it's made from repurposed tunics. One rat tail's width to your left. Brother Anselm is already standing, somehow both fully dressed and fully asleep. His eyes are open, but you're not convinced he's conscious. You sit up and your knees crack loudly in the stone silence of the dormitory. No one reacts. These are the sounds of a monk's morning, the soft rustle of robes, the occasional suppressed sneeze, and the faraway groan of a hinge you're not allowed to fix. There are no alarms in this century, just bells, cold, pitiless bells. And the one that rings now isn't inviting, it's commanding. A single chime, low and heavy, tells your spine it's time to move, even if your spirit's still curled up under that burlap sheet. You light a tallow candle using a flint that takes far too many tries. Sparks fly. Your fingers curse in silence, and eventually a flame flickers to life. You carry it carefully, like you're holding the last warmth in Europe, down a narrow corridor carved from limestone. Historians still argue whether monks rose this early purely for spiritual devotion or because someone thought long days built character. Either way, you're up well before the chickens. There's no breakfast yet. First comes prayer. The chapel is just above freezing, and your breath fogs the air like ghost smoke. You kneel on bare stone and mumble through Latin verses you've half memorized, half guessed. Everyone else seems composed and serene, but you catch a few sleepy sways and a monk or two whose mouths are moving suspiciously off sync. Spiritual lip-syncing is alive and well. After prayers, it's time for manual labor. You still haven't eaten, and your stomach has started negotiating loudly with your brain. It doesn't care if this is a sacred calling, it wants bread. But you've got water to fetch first. The well is outside, which means cold stone underfoot and breath steaming like an overworked ox. Your task is simple. Draw 2 buckets of water and carry them uphill to the brew room. Simple, but in practice, it's splashy, back-straining nonsense. The rope creaks as you lower the bucket down the shaft. Somewhere below, the water waits like an apathetic abyss. When the bucket finally splashes in, you haul it up 1 sloshy inch at a time. Medieval CrossFit. And then, because your life is a comedy performed in sandals, the bucket slips just slightly at the top, soaking your left foot. You suppress a very unmonastic word, catch the eye of Brother Peter nearby, and offer a tight-lipped grimace. He answers with a sympathetic eyebrow raise. You haul your soggy buckets up the hill to the brew house. No shortcuts, no grumbling. Only the sound of your own determined breathing and the low rustle of cassocks in the cold. Fun fact: beer wasn't just a treat in medieval monasteries. It was considered a form of liquid bread, especially useful during fasting seasons when solid food was forbidden. But fermented barley? Technically allowed. Quirky twist? Monks would often consume multiple liters a day, up to 4 or 5, because it was safer than the water, and fasting rules conveniently said nothing about volume. You finally reach the brew room again. Steam curls up from copper cauldrons. Someone's already stoking the fire. You deposit your buckets beside a vat and try to wring out your socks subtly. Spoiler: there is no subtle way to wring out a sock in a room of silent monks. There's still no breakfast. You press your palms together, offer a tiny prayer that the beer won't taste like boiled moss today, and prepare yourself for another long, sacred, slightly soggy day. You don't own a watch, not just because it's the 12th century, but because no one here needs one. Time is not measured in minutes or schedules. It is governed entirely by the bell. That bell is your master. Dictates when you wake, when you eat, when you pray, when you work, and when you pretend not to fall asleep during compline. It tolls from the high stone tower above the chapel, swung by ropes older than your grandparents, and rung by a monk whose forearms could probably crush walnuts just by flexing. This morning, as you stand beside the brew vat still half asleep, it tolls again. A single deep note that echoes like thunder through the abbey's corridors. It's not a chime of warning or alarm. It's a cue, an instruction. You glance around. Without words, your fellow monks shift into a new phase of their tasks. One begins adding grain to the mash tun. Another stirs a thick barley porridge with a paddle the size of a canoe oar. You just nod and join in, as if the bell had whispered instructions directly to your soul. The rhythm is hypnotic. Stir, scoop, pour. Stir, scoop, pour. You catch yourself mouthing the motions like a spell. The heat from the fire seeps through the soles of your leather sandals, your toes grateful, even while your arms start to ache. Monks follow a strict schedule known as the Divine Office. 8 services a day, each one dictated by bells. Matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, compline. Your day isn't so much planned as it is carved in stone by centuries of bell-ringing tradition. Historians still argue whether this rigid routine was spiritual discipline or a monastic form of control. After all, the bell can't be reasoned with. It doesn't care if you've just fallen asleep or if you're in the middle of washing your only pair of underrobes. It rings, and you move. Here's the quirky bit. There wasn't always a monk posted up in the tower yanking the rope. In some wealthier monasteries, they developed clever mechanical systems, weighted pulleys, rotating drums, and even primitive clockwork to strike the bell automatically at set intervals. A medieval version of an alarm clock, except it didn't have a snooze button or mercy. You've stopped bothering to ask yourself, what time is it? Instead, you feel it. You know by instinct what bell is coming next. It's like you've become a tuning fork for monk time. The brew house gets warmer with every bell. By midday, it's practically a sauna, and the scent of boiling wort has soaked into your robes. You smell like cereal left out in the rain. Delicious yeasty cereal. The cellarer appears briefly, robes flapping as he inspects progress. He doesn't speak, of course not, but he gives a curt nod and a thumbs up so solemn you wonder if monks invented it. Then he disappears again, a ghost in wool. You're not even sure how long you've been working. Time isn't a line here, it's a loop. One bell fades, another rings. The sun moves, but only the shadows remind you. You stir the mash, add more grain, and start singing hymns silently in your head just to stay awake. Gregorian chants with a beat drop. Every so often, a junior monk holds up a wooden board with one of the abbey's approved hand signals. Today's says, in essence, stir gently, not like you're rowing to Normandy. You nod and adjust accordingly. In all this, you find something strange. Peace. You don't have to decide what to do next. You don't have to wonder what's expected of you. The bell has already decided. All you have to do is move when it tells you to. And weirdly, there's a comfort in that. You don't need to talk to feel connected to the others. Each of you is doing your part, in silence, synchronized like some celestial dance. When one monk sets down a barrel, Another picks it up without a word. When the fire dips too low, a third one stokes it automatically. It's eerie. It's beautiful. It's also probably why you just dumped hot grain on your foot, because you were too mesmerized to pay attention. A bell rings again, breaking your trance. Time to clean the paddles. The water is still icy. The grain mush is still sticky. The work never ends. But the bell keeps you going. You're elbow deep in lukewarm, damp barley mush when it finally occurs to you to ask, silently of course, why monks even brew beer in the first place. You've never seen Brother Benedict throw back a cold one with a wink. No one's doing keg stands in the cloister. And yet, here you are, assisting in one of the most ancient, sacred, and surprisingly sticky rituals of monastic life. The short answer? Beer is food. And in the medieval world, food that won't kill you is in tragically short supply. Back then, water wasn't the safe, fluoride-rich delight it is now. Streams were full of runoff from pigs, people, and worse. Wells weren't always lined properly. If you drank water straight, you were basically inviting dysentery over for dinner. But beer was boiled during brewing. The alcohol, even at low levels, killed bacteria. It was the safest liquid you could swallow, aside from holy water, and that wasn't exactly thirst-quenching. Historians still argue whether monks truly understood the science behind this microbial miracle, or if they just liked the taste and found it coincidentally life-saving. Either way, beer was as crucial to survival as bread, and in monasteries, the two were practically siblings. You glance down at the grain slop sloshing in your wooden scoop and realize you're quite literally making liquid bread. Even during fasting seasons, those solemn weeks of Lent or Advent, solid food was restricted. But beer? Technically not solid. Technically allowed. So monks brewed a special high-calorie version called Doppelbock, or liquid bread, rich in nutrients and designed to help sustain them when meals got scarce. You can't eat meat? Fine. Drink your vitamins. You smirk to yourself, imagining a modern gym selling monk shakes, now with 12G of medieval protein. Even St. Arnold of Metz, a bishop turned folk hero, famously said, "From man's sweat and God's love, beer came into the world." Bit dramatic, but the sentiment stands. And let's not ignore the financial bonus. Monasteries didn't just drink their beer, they sold it. Pilgrims passing through, they'd pay for a cup. Locals, they'd pay for a barrel. Royalty, they'd order whole wagons of it for feasts. And guess who was making that sweet, sweet barley gold? You, with your calloused hands and semi-frozen sandals. The abbey kept precise records of their brews. How long to mash, when to stir, how much yeast to add, what the barley-to-water ratio should be. These weren't just recipes, they were scripture. Brewing wasn't a side hustle. It was a holy duty. And here's the quirky bit. Some monasteries brewed multiple types of beer. Light ale for the monks themselves, a more potent, tastier brew for guests and nobles, and a weak, barely alcoholic version for children and the sick, the 12th century equivalent of a flight sampler. You, dear novice, are starting on the monk's beer, mild, malty, just enough to keep your innards clean without making you dance during evening prayers. The good stuff, the kind that tastes like toasted bread and dark honey, is locked up somewhere in the abbot's cellar. You'll get there someday, probably after several years of silent obedience and bucket duty. You look over to Brother Hugo, who is hefting a steaming pail of wort like it's his life's mission. Maybe it is. His face is red, his brow is dripping, and his lips are firmly shut. He doesn't even hum. You want to ask if he likes the taste. You want to ask if he ever sneaks an extra cup at night. but you can't. And maybe that's the point. In silence, the beer becomes more than just a drink. It becomes a ritual, a process, a prayer disguised as labor. And sure, it still smells like a medieval gym sock at this stage. But you're starting to understand why monks did this for centuries. You taste a bit of the mash on your finger. It's warm, sweet, and nutty. Not bad. A hint of caramel, maybe. You imagine this sloshed into a clay mug, blessed by the abbot, sipped slowly in the candlelit refectory, while psalms echo softly in the background. For now, though, it's back to stirring, back to obeying the bell, back to brewing salvation one bucket at a time. The first rule of monk fashion is this: no flair, no fuss, no fasteners. The second rule is, don't talk about monk fashion, mostly because you're not allowed to talk. You're standing in your cell, preparing to face the morning chill, and your monastic habit is staring at you from a peg on the wall like a damp, judgmental ghost. It's the same as yesterday's, and the day before, and every day since you arrived. Because in the monastery, one robe fits all, literally and spiritually. You dress in layers of rough wool that somehow manage to be both too hot and not warm enough. The robe is a brownish gray, the color of moral neutrality and oatmeal. Over it, a hooded scapular, a sort of glorified apron that protects the robe from your messier sins, like beer splashes and unexpected firewood splinters. You loop a rope belt around your waist, not because it holds anything up, but because it symbolizes your spiritual commitment. That, and pockets haven't been invented yet. You stuff a small wooden cross into your sleeve, the closest thing to a fashion accessory you're allowed. As you dress, the silence persists. You nod politely to Brother Eustace, who is also halfway through roping himself up. He returns the gesture with a blink. Communication complete. Historians still argue whether the simplicity of monastic dress was entirely about humility or partly about control. After all, when everyone looks the same, it's harder to stand out, harder to rebel, harder to sneak off for a medieval spa day. Not that you'd have time between vespers and hauling barley sacks. The quirky thing? Despite the austerity, monks took great care of their robes. There were rules about how often to wash them, not often, how to repair holes, preferably in silence, and where to store them. Not on the floor, Brother Jerome, we see you. A monk could petition the abbot for a new robe, but only if his current one was literally falling apart. And even then, he might be told to patch it with sackcloth and prayer. You tighten your belt and shuffle toward the brew house. The layers restrict your movement a little, and you make a mental note not to bend too fast unless you want to rip a seam and risk showing your spiritual humility to the entire cloister. Outside, the morning is damp and mossy. Fog curls over the flagstones like a whisper. You pass a monk feeding chickens who manages to toss grain, avoid pecking, and maintain total silence all at once. Impressive. Back in the brew house, the fire's already crackling, and the vats are warm with promise. You stir with your long-handled paddle, trying not to let your robe sleeves droop into the wort. It's an unspoken rule that sleeves in the beer earns you a week on latrine duty. You wipe your brow with your scapular, its one true purpose, and glance around. Every monk here is in the same uniform. Same hood, same belt, same damp wool. But somehow, you're beginning to recognize them, not by their faces or their speech, but by their habits. Literal and behavioral. Brother Felix always stirs counterclockwise. Brother Ambrose hums quietly through his nose when concentrating. Brother Matthew's rope belt is always tied just a bit too tight, like he's afraid he'll float away. You realize, in a monastery, Clothing isn't meant to express personality. It's meant to erase it, or at least blur it enough that your deeds speak louder than your look. You're judged by how faithfully you perform your tasks, not by whether you rock a flattering cowl. There's a certain peace in that, once you get over the itchiness. Still, there's room for tiny, quiet rebellions. A rolled sleeve here, an extra stitch of green thread there. Once, a novice was caught using beeswax to waterproof his boots, and it caused an actual scandal. He was forced to apologize. Not in words, of course, but through an elaborate hand gesture confession that took 3 monks to interpret. You step back from the vat, your robe lightly steaming from the heat. You're drenched, exhausted, and slightly fermented, but your sleeves are clean and your rope belt is still holding. You're dressed for the day, dressed for devotion, dressed for beer. The buckets are heavier today. Or maybe your arms are just staging a quiet rebellion. You grip the thick wooden handle and trudge across the uneven flagstones toward the well again. This task, like everything else here, repeats with clockwork monotony. Water, you've learned, is the true engine behind monastic brewing. Not barley, not yeast, not even divine inspiration. Just bucket after bucket of cold, judgmental water. And in case you're wondering, no, there are still no shortcuts. The aqueduct project was vetoed centuries ago by an abbot who believed suffering strengthens the spirit. You're pretty sure he just didn't like mud on the cloister floor. At the well, the pulley creaks like a haunted violin. You lower the rope hand over hand, your fingers numbed by damp rope and the existential dread of doing this forever. A monk nearby coughs politely into his sleeve, one of the few acceptable vocalizations. You nod in acknowledgement. Communication achieved. When the bucket finally returns from its journey to the underworld, it's brimming with icy clarity. You lift it with a grunt that toes the line between reverent silence and spiritual profanity, then begin the slow uphill walk back toward the brew room. Historians still argue whether monasteries deliberately placed their wells far from the kitchen and brewhouse to promote discipline, or if they were just really bad at architectural planning. Either way, your calves are getting suspiciously muscular. Here's a quirky twist. Some monasteries developed multi-step water purification systems. Sand filters, stone channels, even copper vessels to prevent algae buildup. It wasn't all medieval ignorance. The monks were observant, methodical, and weirdly obsessed with clean buckets. You pass a small herb garden on your route. Parsley, sage, rosemary, and the medieval Holy Trinity, yarrow, mugwort, and wormwood. All of them were potential additives for beer or potions, or things you were never told about and learned not to ask. By the time you reach the brewhouse, your hands are raw, and your back is humming a low Gregorian chant of discomfort. You lower the water into a secondary barrel for temperature adjustment. The goal here is not to shock the grain, because even barley apparently has emotional needs. Inside, the brew room is misty and aromatic. Steam rises from vats like spectral banners, curling into the timbered ceiling. You navigate your way to the boiling station and pour in the water, careful not to splash your robe again. One time was enough. You now smell faintly like sour bread and regret. The monk beside you passes over a bundle of herbs. No words, just the herbs. You take them with a nod and drop them into the steeping wort. The mixture hisses softly, like it approves. Water here isn't just a utility, it's a holy element. It's used in blessings, in cleaning, in baptisms, and in beer. It's boiled, blessed, and boiled again. You begin to feel like a glorified water chauffeur with delusions of spiritual grandeur. Sometimes you wonder how long it would take to train a donkey to carry the buckets. Then you remember the vow of humility and the fact that the last time someone suggested using livestock, the abbot made them fast for a week to reflect on mechanical pride. You settle back onto your stool. No, not to rest, to watch the boil, because now the mixture must bubble exactly as intended. Not too fast, not too slow. No stirring allowed during this stage. You just watch and breathe. That's the rhythm of monastic brewing, bursts of heavy labor broken by long, quiet stints of observation. You monitor the foam, the bubbling, the color, and the smell. When it starts to smell like someone baking bread in a damp sock drawer, you know you're on the right track. In the silence, your thoughts drift. You wonder what life outside the monastery smells like. You wonder if anyone out there knows just how many buckets it takes to make salvation taste slightly nutty with a hint of smoke. Then the bell rings again. Water hauling time is over. Now comes the next sacred step in this bubbling pilgrimage. You don't need to check a list or read a recipe. As always, the next step comes not from instruction, but intuition, or more accurately, centuries of muscle memory passed down like a silent chant. You follow the gentle wave of movement as the monks begin filtering through the small stone arch that leads to the cellarer's domain. The cellarer is not a friendly man. His expression is carved permanently into what scholars might call mildly disappointed frown. He is the monk in charge of all food, drink, and storage. Think of him as the medieval pantry overlord. Everything that enters your stomach, eventually or immediately, passes through his jurisdiction. You step cautiously into his lair, ducking beneath an arch that probably predates forks. Shelves line the walls, each stacked with bundles of herbs, sacks of barley, cloth-wrapped cheeses, and dozens of oddly shaped ceramic jugs labeled in Latin shorthand that may or may not be curses. The cellarer appears from the shadows. You swear he materialized like a ghost, holding a ledger that seems more like a weapon than a book. He doesn't speak. He simply lifts a hand, crooks a finger, and points at a sack. That sack, your friend, is barley. You sling it over your shoulder with a monk's dignity and a peasant's grunt. The grain inside shifts like sand, except much heavier and with more intent to bruise your collarbone. This is the backbone of the beer. No barley, no brew, just warm water and disappointment. Historians still argue whether cellarers had full autonomy or were micromanaged by abbots. Judging by the way this one glares at your slightly askew sandals, you're guessing full autonomy with a side of passive-aggressive authority. You dump the barley at the grinding station, a side room that smells like dusty oatmeal and unspoken tension. A hand mill sits on a low bench, and beside it, a monk with forearms like iron pokers cranks away in a rhythm that could probably summon rain. This is where things get primitive. No powered mills, no clever crank systems, just stone on stone, rotated slowly by your own hands. You take your place beside the monk and begin grinding, the wheel's resistance making your biceps question your spiritual calling. As you grind, you feel the grains break into coarse flour. Not too fine, you're not baking cakes, but not too chunky either. It's a delicate balance. The goal is to create enough surface area for the sugars to dissolve when boiled without turning the mash into porridge soup. Quirky fact: some monasteries even experimented with different types of grain, spelt, rye, even oats, based on availability and how indulgent the abbot was feeling that week. You once heard a rumor that a Flemish monastery tried adding hazelnuts. That monk now tends sheep. You catch yourself falling into a trance, lulled by the grinding noise, the motion, the scent of warm grain. It's oddly comforting, like a lullaby for your elbows. Suddenly a monk walks in carrying a small wooden box. He opens it with the reverence of a man handling sacred relics. Inside, wrapped in a layer of cheesecloth and stored in a beeswax-lined cup, is yeast. Precious, temperamental, half-magic yeast. Modern folk might pop open a packet and sprinkle it like fairy dust. But here, yeast is coaxed, captured, and preserved like it's a cranky pet snake. Some of it comes from wild fermentation, just ambient spores floating in the abbey air. Other times they harvest a successful batch by saving some foamy residue and storing it in cool cellars, feeding it like sourdough starter. Historians still argue about how much medieval monks understood about yeast. They knew it worked. They knew it misbehaved. But whether they grasped its microbial nature or just thought it was God's invisible bubbles is up for debate. You bow your head as the yeast is transferred, in silence, to the prepared vat. It will rest now, wrapped in barley sugar and sacred hopes, ready to come alive. You scoop the freshly ground barley into a wooden pail and carry it back to the brew room, where the others are beginning the mash. The mash tun steams with earthy sweetness. It smells like a bakery, melted in a thunderstorm. You dump the grist in and begin to stir. The cellarer passes once more, inspects the color, lifts one eyebrow an inch, then leaves without a word. You count that as praise. You learn quickly that brewing beer in a monastery is secretly just medieval weightlifting. The mash tun sits before you like a steaming cauldron of secrets. Inside, water and ground barley swirl together in a thick, bubbling hug of grain and heat. Your job? Stir it. Stir it with a wooden paddle long enough to double as a bridge and wide enough to qualify as a minor architectural feature. You grab the paddle and begin. Every motion is a full-body effort. Shoulders groan, forearms burn. Your knees lock in place like they've signed a vow of stillness. The paddle resists you, flexing under the pressure of heavy mash and ancient gravity. Brother Aldrich stands across the tun from you, mirroring your movements. Neither of you speaks, of course. But there's a strange telepathy between two monks locked in a stirring battle. His gaze says, "Clockwise now." Yours replies, "Don't you dare stop." The mash thickens, your arms throb. You start to question everything, your calling, your triceps, and why anyone ever thought fermented grain water was a good idea in the first place. Historians still argue whether monastic brewers truly saw this part of the process as sacred or simply necessary. Some ancient records suggest that stirring was accompanied by silent prayers or even rhythmic breathing meant to focus the soul. You try it. Inhale on the push, exhale on the pull. You still want to die, but at least your death will be synchronized. Quirky tidbit? In some monasteries they used stirring songs, not sung aloud, mind you, but silently mouthed or tapped in rhythm to keep pace. One popular one, you're told, was based on Psalm 69. The irony of "I sink in deep mire where there is no foothold" is not lost on you as the mash splashes your robe again. A novice walks by holding a small wooden board with a carved hand signal. Slow down. You nod. You slow. Your arms are grateful. Your pride is not. The heat from the tun rises like a ghostly sigh, fogging the lower parts of your hood. You blink away the sweat. Every pore on your body has joined the labor. Even your eyelashes feel damp. And the smell. Oh, the smell. It's warm and sweet at first, like warm cereal and crushed nuts. But underneath that is a dense, yeasty funk, like someone forgot their bread dough in a root cellar for a week. It's not unpleasant exactly, just assertive. the scent of transformation. You pause to scrape the bottom of the tun. That's the trickiest part. If the mash scorches down there, it ruins the whole batch. And then Brother Thomas will raise an eyebrow so high, you'll be assigned to latrine duty until Advent. You stir, and stir, and stir. Eventually, the mash reaches its perfect consistency, a golden porridge of pre-beer potential. It's time to rest the mash and let the enzymes do their work. You step back, arms dangling uselessly at your sides, and try not to pass out. You settle on a nearby stool, a rare and glorious thing made from wobbly wood and what might be hope. You sip some weak beer, because again, water is basically poison, and watch steam rise from the tun like incense. You feel a quiet pride. No one claps, no one high-fives, but you know you did well. Stirring isn't glamorous, it's not glorious, it's not even particularly fun, but it's essential. And in this place, essential means holy. You look down at your hands, blistered, grain-dusted, sacred. Tomorrow, you'll do it all again. You're beginning to realize that the fermentation room is both the heart and the armpit of the abbey. It's not the most glamorous part of the process, nor the most labor-intensive, but it's easily the weirdest. You step into the low-vaulted space, stone-walled and always damp, and are immediately hit by a smell that can only be described as spiritual feet mixed with rising bread. The air is thick, not just humid, soupy. You can feel it cling to your robes, your eyebrows, the inside of your nose. Warmth radiates off the big wooden barrels and squat clay vessels stacked in rows, all gently bubbling like contented cauldrons. Each one is full of a different batch of monk brew in progress, and every one of them smells slightly alive, because they are. This is where the magic happens, or depending on your theology, the biochemistry. The mash you stirred earlier has been transferred into the fermenters, and now the yeast gets to work. It's not a fast process. You're not going to see bubbling foam and frothy fountains like in a cartoon. No, this is the slow, deliberate breath of fermentation. Tiny yeasts eating sugars and exhaling alcohol and carbon dioxide, turning oat soup into blessed beverage. Historians still argue whether monks knew exactly what yeast did or simply thought God was involved. There are texts where the bubbles are referred to as the living spirit, and brews are blessed in hopes they'll turn out right. Some monks even named their starter yeasts. You once met one who whispered to his like it was a beloved pet. Here's the quirky part. The room's temperature must be carefully maintained. Not too hot, not too cold. If it gets too chilly, the yeast goes dormant. Too warm, and it dies. So monks learned tricks, placing fermenters near bread ovens during winter, or storing them in underground cellars during summer. One abbey even used sheep wool insulation. You're still not sure if the sheep gave permission. You move carefully through the room, watching the little airlocks puff tiny bubbles every now and then, like content burps. A novice is gently skimming foam off one barrel. Another is marking ferment times on a wooden board with chalk, counting days not in numbers, but with tally marks shaped like tiny crosses. Your task today is observation. You're here to watch, listen, smell. If something goes wrong in this room, the entire batch could be ruined. You remember the tale of the batch of 87, 8 barrels lost to mold because Brother Sebastian opened a window for fresh air. That window has been permanently sealed with mortar and passive-aggressive signage ever since. You lift the lid on one of the fermenters, just a crack, and peer inside. The surface is bubbling gently, with a thin foam crest and a faint crackle like distant rain on parchment. You inhale, Yep, smells like future beer and questionable hygiene. You close the lid again and whisper a silent prayer, not because you have to, but because it feels right. In the corner, Brother Anselm is seated on a stool, gently rocking back and forth in what can only be described as fermentation meditation. He's the Abbey's unofficial yeast whisperer. No one knows how he does it, but his batches always finish faster and taste smoother. You've tried to copy him, but every time you rock like that, you just feel seasick. The room hums with unseen life. It's quiet, but not silent. The wooden beams creak. Liquid shifts in barrels. You think you hear yeast giggling. That might be hallucination. You haven't had breakfast. Speaking of which, it's almost time for midday bread and beer. Yes, beer at every meal, but not the beer in this room. This stuff is days, sometimes weeks, from ready. You're drinking the earlier batches, now resting in cool cellars. A continuous cycle. Prayers. Or laundry. You take one last lap around the barrels, checking the chalk marks and sniffing the air. One batch smells slightly off, too sharp, almost vinegary. You flag it with a twig placed diagonally across the lid. A silent warning. Brother Hugo will investigate later with his advanced sense of smell, honed through years of sniffing dubious cheeses. As you leave the fermentation room, you feel a strange reverence. These vessels are ordinary wood and clay, but inside them, transformation is happening. Sugars are becoming something stronger. Grain is becoming joy. Labor is becoming reward. And soon, you'll drink it. You sit at the long wooden table in the refectory, hands folded, eyes cast modestly downward, as a shallow ceramic mug is placed before you with quiet reverence. Breakfast, though not in the bacon and egg sense, more in the here is your daily bread and cup of medieval necessity kind of way. You lift the mug. It's heavy, slightly chipped, and cool to the touch. Inside sloshes a pale, cloudy beer. You take a careful sip. It's flat, slightly sour, and tastes vaguely of wet bread left too long in a root cellar. Still, it's better than the water. Because let's be clear, you don't drink water here unless you're feeling reckless. In the Middle Ages, the average water supply was more of a public health hazard than a thirst quencher. Wells could be contaminated. Rivers were used as sewers by both humans and animals. Even rain barrels were suspect unless you enjoyed the occasional surprise frog or half-fermented leaf stew. Beer, however, was boiled during brewing, twice if the monks were feeling cautious. And even the weakest brew had a small amount of alcohol to kill off pathogens. It wasn't about getting tipsy. It was about not dying before terse. Historians still argue whether the monks truly understood germ theory before it existed, or if they just got lucky. Maybe they thought the bubbles were holy. Maybe they just trusted that anything that took this much effort had to be good for you. Quirky fact. Monks would drink up to 5 liters of beer per day. Not the abbot's strong stuff, mind you. Just the regular watery ale brewed for nourishment and hydration. That's right. You're drinking your way through breakfast, lunch, dinner, prayers, and possibly early morning regrets. You take another sip. The beer is slightly better than yesterday, less sour, a hint of toasted grain. You make a mental note to compliment the fermenting barrel later, silently, through prayer and loving glances. Around you, the refectory is silent, except for the clinking of spoons and the occasional thunk of a monk trying not to fall asleep into his barley porridge. The only speaking aloud during meals comes from one designated reader who recites scripture or saintly anecdotes in a rhythmic, lulling cadence. It's like ASMR for the soul. You're not supposed to listen too closely, but your ears latch onto the story of a martyr who once survived on dew and moss for a week. You're grateful for your beer. After the meal, mugs are rinsed in a communal barrel of lukewarm water, and you return to your brewing tasks. There's a special pride in knowing that the liquid in your belly came from your own sore arms and stubborn yeast. Later that day, a pilgrim arrives. He's mud-streaked and sunburned, clutching a wooden staff and eyeing the barrels with hungry curiosity. He's offered a seat, a bowl of soup, and, of course, a mug of beer. The same one you drank that morning. He sips it like it's ambrosia. You smile. You know it tastes like damp oats. But to someone who's been walking for 10 days straight, it might as well be gold. You begin to see beer differently, not as a drink, but as a gift, a gesture of welcome, a way of saying you're safe here, in a world full of dangerous rivers and suspicious puddles. It's warm and familiar, and just bitter enough to remind you that life, like brewing, is a process, and tomorrow you'll drink it again, not because it's luxurious, not because it's delicious, but because it's sacred, in the quiet, burpy, barley-scented way only monks could understand. You don't exactly have a taproom menu to choose from, but today you notice something different in your mug. Not drastically different, but just enough for your well-trained, underfed palate to go, wait a second, this isn't the same monk juice as yesterday. Turns out, in this monastery, not all beers are created equal. There's a quiet, almost conspiratorial hierarchy in the barrels, subtle variations in recipe, strength, and flavor depending on who the beer is intended for. The monks don't talk about it because, well, they don't talk, but everyone knows the truth. The abbot drinks the good stuff. You've never seen his private stash, but you've heard whispers, silent whispers through glances and tilted mugs, that his ale is dark, rich, and so smooth it might qualify as sin-adjacent. It's brewed in smaller quantities, aged longer, and infused with secret ingredients known only to him and, possibly, Brother Hugo, who once disappeared for a week and came back smelling faintly of cloves. You, humble novice, get what's called small beer. Not small as in adorably packaged, but small as in low alcohol, thin-bodied, and purpose-built for hydration and humility. It's functional, refreshing if you squint your taste buds, but luxurious? Not so much. Historians still argue whether these class-based brew distinctions were formalized or just evolved naturally. In many abbeys they became part of the hierarchy: strong ale for guests and feast days, light beer for daily consumption, and barely fermented water wheat slush for novices and children. Here's a quirky fact for your mental collection. Some monasteries had 3 grades of beer. Prima was for the abbot and honored visitors. Full-bodied, spicy, sometimes aged in barrels scented with herbs. Secunda was for regular monks, drinkable, nourishing, occasionally sour. Tertia was for servants, workers, and novices like you. You begin to suspect tertia translates loosely to, "We hope you like disappointment." Back in the brew house, you help Brother Thomas pour the next batch into barrels. He's assigned you to batch 7B, which, according to the chalk scrawl on the barrel head, is for the guest house. That means slightly stronger ale, with hints of dried fruit and toasted grain. You resist the urge to lick the stirring paddle. During bottling, well, barreling, technically, you notice a senior monk dip a ladle into a batch marked Specialis. He tastes it solemnly, nods, and then sets it aside to be blessed. Not all beer gets blessed, just the ceremonial batches, usually made for feast days, weddings, or when a bishop shows up unannounced and everyone pretends they weren't just arguing about mutton storage. You look at the different barrels lining the cellar walls and realize they're quietly labeled in code. A scratch here, a faint carving there. Nothing overt. But to those who know, it's clear. The monks have created a secret system of symbols to denote strength, purpose, and rank. You start playing a little game. Guess who drinks what? Brother Alaric, always smiling, definitely drinks secunda with a splash of honey. Brother Ewan, who frowns like he's lost a theological debate with his sandals, probably drinks tertia and likes it that way. And you? You sip your morning mug with new awareness. It may be weak, but it's yours. Brewed by your own hands, from grain you carried, water you hauled, and yeast you prayed over. And someday, if you stir long enough, clean faithfully, and refrain from speaking aloud during meals, you might rise in the monastic ranks and get a taste of the good stuff. Until then, you toast silently with your tertia, clink mugs with Brother Peter, who doesn't blink, and savor the noble bitterness of earning your place in a world where beer is both a beverage and a badge. You're handed a cup of beer, not to drink, to judge. This is the monastery's tasting ritual, and today it's your turn to evaluate the fruit of your silent labor. The beer is freshly pulled from a barrel you helped fill 3 weeks ago. It's had time to ferment, rest, and find itself spiritually. Now it's ready to be tested, not by a sommelier in a crisp white shirt, but by you, in a slightly beer-stained habit. There are no words exchanged. Just a nod from Brother Matthias as he hands you the wooden cup, his eyebrows silently urging, "Don't screw this up." You lift the mug. It smells earthy, grainy, with a touch of something sharp, clove maybe, or the after-smell of too many rainy days in a stone cellar. You take a sip. It's not terrible. It's also not great. But you swallow solemnly with the seriousness of someone receiving last rites. Tasting beer in the monastery isn't about pleasure. It's about devotion, balance, and humility. You are not here to get drunk. You are here to ensure the brew is worthy of being served in the refectory, offered to pilgrims, or donated as alms. You're tasting it for God. Sort of. Historians still argue whether monks considered beer a form of sacrament or just a health beverage with benefits. Some abbots recorded brewing logs like they were scripture. Others treated it more practically. If it tasted like boiled weeds, they poured it out. If it tasted decent, they blessed it and moved on. Here's a quirky bit. Some abbeys held silent tasting panels, where a group of monks would sample new batches, then vote using hand signs, eye squints, or wax tablets marked with symbols like a circle for good, a slash for try again, and a starburst for Brother Cedric messed it up again. You raise your eyebrows politely at Brother Matthias. He nods in monk language. Passable. The barrel lives another day, and so begins the adjustment phase. A few grains are added to a nearby barrel to mellow the bitterness. One monk lights a small herbal sachet on fire, not for aromatics, but as a timekeeper, counting down until the final filtration. You help pour the batch through a cloth funnel made from retired robes into smaller aging vessels. There's no machinery, no automation, just arms, fire, patience, and a deep trust in yeast. When you ask, silently, if you're done for the day, Brother Matthias holds up a familiar tasting board. On it, scrawled in Latin shorthand, is your new assignment. Add Groot. Groot is the medieval version of hops. Before hops became the standard, monks flavored beer with wild herbs, roots, and flowers, a bitter blend. meant to preserve the brew and ward off anything undesirable, be it spoilage, rats, or sin. Each abbey had its own secret mix. Some used bog myrtle, others wormwood. One bold Italian order used lavender and nearly caused a riot among the elder monks. Your abbey's groot is modest but effective. Yarrow, mugwort, and a pinch of rosemary. You add it carefully, stirring just enough to blend without agitating the yeast. The room fills with a strange, peppery scent, like sage tea and old shoes. You suppress a sneeze. You pour one final sample and take another sip. Better. Balanced. Earthy with a mild bitterness, but smooth enough to serve at supper. You bow your head slightly and whisper thanks. Not aloud, but somewhere inside. This beer won't win awards. It won't be remembered in chronicles. But it won't give anyone dysentery, and it was made with care, silence, and the kind of focused attention most people save for miracles. And in its own quiet way, that's exactly what this is. You've nearly spoken 3 times today, and all 3 were during the explosion incident. Let's back up. The rule of Saint Benedict is clear. Refrain from idle words. That includes complaints, jokes, and any muttered invective about hot grain porridge in your sandals. But today is testing your vows. It starts with the brewing room fire, which has been burning too low all morning. You try to communicate this to Brother Peregrine using your standard signals. Raised eyebrow, pointed finger, shrug, then exaggerated cold shiver. He responds by blinking once and walking away. Fine. You stoke the fire yourself, adding extra logs until the heat finally builds to what the yeast seems to approve of. Gently bubbling, slightly sulfuric, and smelling faintly of soggy bread. Then you check the kettle. That's when you hear it. A pop, followed by a very wet thud. The lid of one fermenter, batch 5C, the notorious troublemaker, has blown clean off, launching a geyser of foamy wort straight into the air. You freeze, half covered in froth, praying no one saw you near it. Brother Cedric, unfortunately, walks in just in time to witness your beer baptism. He doesn't say anything. Of course he doesn't. But the corners of his mouth twitch like a disapproving statue being tested by pigeons. Historians still argue whether monks invented fermentation safety protocols or just relied on divine luck and wooden lids. Exploding batches weren't uncommon, especially during warm months or on feast day eves when yeast had a little too much to celebrate. Quirky fact: in some abbeys, there were entire hand signals dedicated to brewing emergencies. The fire is too low. The mash is stuck. The vat is hissing suspiciously. And everyone's favorite, run. These hand signs were passed from elder to novice like a sacred dance. Part necessity, part comedy. Today, you perform a full sequence. Something went boom, followed by, not my fault, and capped off with, I need a mop. Brother Cedric answers with the most expressive sigh you've ever seen someone deliver entirely through posture. Once the foam has been cleaned and your dignity mostly reassembled, you gather with 2 other monks to begin the daily choreographing of hand signals. This isn't something the general public knows about, but it's vital to the brewery's operation. Need more grain? Tap fist to chest twice. Water running low? Form a W with both hands, then mime pouring. Yeast angry? Wiggle fingers under your chin and point at the nearest bubbling vat. It's like a silent theater troupe, where every actor is wearing the same costume, and no one gets applause. You glance across the brew room and spot Brother Ulrich, performing the dreaded urgent heat adjustment signal. A pinched gesture, resembling someone pretending to play a very nervous accordion. You leap into action, adjusting the kettle's position so the temperature doesn't rise too fast. Too much heat, and the yeast gets cranky. Cranky yeast leads to more explosions, which leads to more sticky robes, which leads to... You get the picture. And then there's the worst hand signal of all, the slow, solemn gesture of someone pointing directly at you while holding up one charred wooden spoon. It means, loosely translated, you forgot the mash paddle in the kettle again. You accept the rebuke with a slow head bow and mentally assign yourself 1 extra hour of grain grinding as penance. You begin to appreciate the silent complexity of this world. There's no sarcasm, no empty flattery, just gestures that cut through ego and get to the point. A nod can mean, well done, or we survived. A shrug might mean, we tried. A simple handshake after a successful brew day might be the monk's equivalent of a standing ovation. You also realize that some monks invent their own signals, personalized flares that sneak beneath the radar of official monastic protocol. Brother Hugo likes to wiggle his ears when the brew is particularly good. Brother Bernard rolls his eyes in exactly 3 directions to mean we're running low on rosemary. You're tempted to invent one yourself. Maybe something involving eyebrow raises and dramatic cape swishes. You'll keep it under wraps, for now. Back at your station, the foam has settled, the batch is salvageable, and the yeast seems to have forgiven you. You take a breath, give a humble thank you wave to no one in particular, and carry on. No words, no praise, just the quiet choreography of monks brewing beer and occasionally dodging it. You're sent to the gatehouse today, not as a punishment, but as part of your brewing duties. Specifically, to serve beer to pilgrims. Yes, your silent, barley-drenched life now intersects with the muddy boots of travelers who've walked weeks for a blessing, a crust of bread, and, most importantly, a mug of safe, clean, monastery-brewed beer. The abbey's gatehouse is modest, a stone arch with a wooden hatch that opens onto a dirt road. Pilgrims arrive in 2s and 3s, dragging staffs, wrapped in cloaks, dust on their lashes and reverence in their eyes. They kneel at the threshold or kiss the stone. Some clutch prayer beads, others mugs. You stand behind the service counter, a wide wooden board worn smooth by generations of monastic elbows. Before you, a small cask rests on its stand, spigot primed. You glance at Brother Felix, who gives you a tiny nod. You're cleared to serve. No words are exchanged. You pour, you pass, you smile faintly. The pilgrims whisper thanks, some in Latin, others in languages you don't know. One woman bows so deeply you worry she's about to faint. You offer her a bit of bread, and she weeps openly. You nod solemnly, trying not to weep into the tap. This beer isn't the strong stuff. It's light, cloudy, herbal, a bit sour, a traveler's brew. Enough calories to lift their spirits, enough hydration to keep them walking, and just enough alcohol to help forget the blisters. Historians still argue whether monasteries gave out beer out of charity or clever public relations. Likely both. Abbeys were often wealthy, but beer was one way to be visibly generous, to show goodwill, to remind the world that inside those walls were men who prayed, brewed, and cared. Quirky detail. In some regions, monks brewed ale for the road, a thinner version poured into waxed leather bladders that could hang from a pilgrim's belt. Other abbeys even stamped clay mugs with their insignia. Like holy merch, you're startled by a dog, a huge, muddy one, padding up beside a barefoot man with a scar across his forehead. The man nods toward the tap. You pour. The dog waits patiently, tongue out, tail thumping the flagstone. You look at Brother Felix. He stares back. Slowly, very solemnly, He produces a small wooden bowl from his robe and places it on the stone. You pour a shallow splash into it. The dog slurps gratefully. Silent charity indeed. As the sun arcs overhead, the line grows. You pour and smile and never speak. One woman insists on showing you a tooth she lost on the road. You nod politely and point her toward the infirmary. Another man gives you a carved whistle in thanks. You bow your head and accept it as if it were a relic. You begin to recognize the emotional weight this beer carries. It's not just a drink. It's hope, relief, human contact in a world of dust and sore feet. You brewed it with aching arms and silent prayers, and now it's healing people in small, foamy ways. At one point, a child holds up a finger and then mimics drinking. You glance around, unsure. Brother Felix appears beside you, hands you a mug of diluted small beer, barely fermented, almost water. You hand it over. The child beams like he's been handed a crown. As evening approaches, the flow of pilgrims slows. You help rinse the mugs in a wooden basin, the water tinged with foam and thanks. Brother Felix collects leftover bread and arranges it in a basket to take to the outer fields. Some will go to beggars, some to nearby widows, and a few slices, predictably, to the abbey's chicken flock. You carry the empty cask back through the cloister, the sloshing echoing faintly off the stone walls. It's lighter now, not just physically, but spiritually, as if each mug poured today also poured something out of you. A kind of fatigue laced with grace. Tomorrow you'll brew again. But today, you gave something to the world. No sermons, no speeches, just a wooden tap and a mug full of good intentions. You're in the scriptorium now, but not to copy Bibles or illuminate saints with gold leaf halos. No, today you've been summoned for something far more cryptic, to assist in recording a beer recipe. Yes, the sacred brewing manual is getting a new entry, and like everything in this abbey, it must be documented properly, silently, and confusingly. You sit beside Brother Alban, the monastery's official scribe. He's wearing gloves to protect the vellum, and he has the same expression one might wear while performing heart surgery on a hedgehog. This isn't a casual jot down. This is medieval brewing scripture. He opens a thick manuscript bound in dark leather, its pages crackling with age and ink that smells like old berries and burnt soot. Inside are dozens of recipes, written in a mix of Latin, pictograms, and passive-aggressive shorthand. Nothing is direct. Nothing is easy. You recognize one entry from earlier this year, 3 scoops of God's barley. Heat until the steam of righteousness rises. Stir with the patience of Job. Add the bitter herb to taste. That last part, to taste, has led to several explosive batches and one foam-flooded refectory. You glance at Brother Alban, who dips his quill in ink and begins writing the next recipe. His Latin is beautiful, but deliberately vague. Instead of 2 gallons water, he writes, "A vessel's worth, as carried without spill by the youngest novice." Instead of "ferment for 7 days," he writes, "Let it rest until the moon nods twice, and the scent no longer offends the angels." Historians still argue whether these cryptic recipes were spiritual metaphors or early intellectual property protection. If a rival abbey stole your beer formula, they'd need both a translator and the patience of 3 saints to make it work. Quirky fact. Some monasteries wrote recipes in code, replacing ingredients with symbols. Barley might be drawn as a small sheaf, water as a fish, and yeast as a puff of wind. You once found a note that said, "Fish, cloud, sacred fire, stir with 3rd spoon from left." Even Brother Alban has to squint at that one. You're tasked with grinding ink blocks into pigment while he writes. The process is slow, deliberate, and smells faintly like wet charcoal. At one point, he hands you a feather with the silent expectation that you trace the decorative margin vines around the newest entry. You oblige, trying not to draw a grumpy face into the barley leaf cluster. There's an undeniable sense of reverence here. These recipes aren't just instructions, they're living prayers, documented with the same care as scripture. Each one contains the sweat of a dozen monks, the patience of yeast, and the unspoken hope that the next batch doesn't explode. When the writing is finished, Brother Alban sprinkles fine sand across the page to set the ink. You watch, mesmerized as the grains absorb excess moisture. He shakes them off with a single perfect flick. Not a word is said. Then comes the final step, the signature symbol. Every recipe gets one, a kind of brew blessing glyph drawn in red ink. Today's is a small circle with 3 dots, signifying shared effort, shared silence, shared cup. He adds a flourish to the edge, something like a wheat stalk merged with a cross, then closes the book with a satisfying thump. You carry the manuscript to the archive shelf, sliding it into place among centuries of liquid history. The weight of it settles in your arms like something alive. These recipes, these coded poetic fragments, are the heartbeat of the Abbey. Proof that even in silence, the monks leave a trace. You leave the scriptorium with ink-smudged fingers and a strange new respect for how much effort it takes to write, "Don't add too much mugwort," without actually saying it. Back in the brewhouse, you'll test the recipe tomorrow. But for now, you've given the Abbey something more lasting. Age of sacred fermentation, ready for the next generation of silent, soggy-robed novices to decipher. It begins with a hiss. Not the kind you make when you step barefoot on a cold stone floor, but a soft, sinister whisper escaping the side of a sealed cask. You've just nudged batch 9C, and now it's bubbling, angrily. A bad omen in beer speak. You pause, waiting to see if it calms down. It doesn't. The foam rises like sour sea spray. Something's wrong. Grab a signal board and flash the emergency icon. A vaguely alarmed-looking monk face drawn next to a leaking barrel. Brother Hugo sees it, squints, and gestures. Get the cellarer. The monastery has no official blame system, of course. Everything is done with humility and grace. But when a batch goes wrong, when it sours, spoils, or tries to leave the barrel on its own, there's always a quiet investigation. And the usual suspects: yeast, temperature, and human error. You brace yourself. The cellarer arrives like a thundercloud in sandals. He kneels by the cask, sniffs dramatically, and gives you a glance so heavy with judgment it could crush a bushel of barley. He gestures sharply. Open it. You do. What emerges is a smell best described as fermented regret. It's sour, acidic, and oddly fruity. Not in a good way. More like someone left cherries in the sun next to a dead squirrel fruity. You've officially made bad beer. Historians still argue whether monks viewed failed batches as punishable offenses or teachable moments. Some records show ruined barrels being dumped into pig troughs. Others suggest they were quietly served to guests from rival monasteries with a polite smile and a slightly over-generous pour. Quirky tradition? Some abbeys held Blame Vespers, a silent evening reflection where brewers sat in a circle and passed a barley stalk until the culprit admitted, via eye contact and self-flagellation, what went wrong. Today, the cellarer doesn't say anything, obviously. He just draws a small X on the barrel head, the monastic symbol for "let this one go." It means the beer won't be aged, served, or saved. It's done. You carry the cask, sloshing and rebellious, to the compost trench near the herb garden. It joins a few other barrels of past mistakes. One of them is still hissing softly. You give it a wide berth. And now begins the real mystery. What happened? You retrace your steps from 3 weeks ago. The mash temp was fine. The yeast wasn't sluggish. The Groot blend was measured. Probably. You shuffle back to the brew house and pull out the wooden ledger, flipping to the recipe notes. There it is. Batch 9C. You scan the entry. Wait. Someone wrote +2 scoops honey. You blink. Honey? That wasn't part of the recipe. You'd never add sugar to a small beer. It accelerates fermentation, yes, but it also invites wild yeasts, spoiling agents, and all manner of microbial mischief. You feel it in your bones. Brother Cedric. He has that gleam in his eye, the one that says, "What if we made it sweeter this time?" He's the kind of monk who treats brewing like a personal art project. And today, his improvisation has created a batch of honey-flavored horror. Of course you can't accuse him. You can't even raise your eyebrows meaningfully unless you want to be passive-aggressively reassigned to broom duty. So you do the only thing you can. You update the log. One neat line added beneath the entry. Unapproved honey. May God forgive the sweetness. Tomorrow you'll try again. The barley's still good. The yeast is still sleeping peacefully in its linen-lined jar. You'll scrub the vat with holy vinegar, bless the new batch with extra silence, and hope Brother Cedric is too busy alphabetizing the Psalms to interfere. Failure is part of the process. Even sacred beer has bad days. But in this monastery, you learn to fail quietly, clean thoroughly, and brew again. Always with the hope that next time, the foam will rise exactly as it should. The feast day is approaching. You can tell not by any announcements, those don't happen here, but by the subtle frenzy bubbling under the silence. Robes are moving faster. Bells are ringing longer. Bread ovens are smoking harder. And in the brewery, the barrels are being polished. That's right. You polish the barrels. Brother Marcus hands you a stiff-bristled brush and a rag made from a robe too holy for continued use. Together, you and 3 other monks start rubbing each wooden surface to a faint sheen, not because the beer will taste better, but because on feast days, presentation matters. Feast days in the monastery don't mean wild dancing or boar on spits, but they do mean strong beer. A few times a year, the abbot approves what can only be described as full-throttle ale. Rich, dark, higher in alcohol, and brewed with ingredients that would never make it into the daily mug. Spices like cinnamon, dried fruit peels, sometimes even honey with permission. This is the kind of beer brewed in secret corners of the cellar, labeled in code, and blessed 3 times by 3 different monks to ensure the yeast doesn't panic halfway through. Historians still argue whether these feast brews were purely celebratory or part of a broader liturgical tradition. Some accounts suggest the beer itself was a symbol of divine abundance. Others imply it was simply a way to keep monks awake through extended evening prayers. You begin preparing the next sacred batch under the guidance of Brother Hugo, who today is vibrating with excitement in a very subdued, monk-approved way. He opens a special clay jar filled with dried figs, a rare treasure, probably smuggled in with last month's wool shipment, and hands them to you with trembling hands. "Don't drop them," his eyes say. You nod solemnly. The figs go into the wort, softening it, adding sweetness and complexity. Then come the herbs, thyme, a bit of sage, and, at the last moment, a single twist of orange peel dried over the chapel fire. It smells like celebration and burnt prayer, The brewing process follows the same sacred steps: boiling, mashing, stirring. But everything feels more theatrical today. The mash tun bubbles a little louder. The steam curls more dramatically. Even the yeast seems livelier, frothing like it knows it's about to become legendary. Quirky fact? In some abbeys, feast beer was brewed with relics nearby: bones of saints, splinters of the true cross, or even rings worn by martyrs, so that the brew could be blessed by proximity. You don't know what's buried beneath this brewhouse floor, but you hope it's friendly. By midday, the room smells like roasted grain, spice, and quiet anticipation. You sneak a sip from the cooling ladle. It's warm and sweet, with a bit of peppery depth, like liquid gingerbread with ambition. You catch Brother Cedric doing the same thing moments later. He shrugs, unrepentant. You both nod. This batch is going to be good. After evening prayers, you help carry the first keg into the refectory. It's not opened yet, that happens tomorrow, but its presence alone changes the air. Monks pass it reverently. One pats it like an old friend. Another bows slightly, then tries to pretend he was adjusting his robe. And you? You feel something swell in your chest. Pride, maybe, or thirst. Feast beer is not for indulgence. It's a ritual, a marker of time. A reminder that not all days are the same, and even in silence, there is celebration. And you helped make it happen. Tomorrow, the bell will ring longer. The meals will be hotter. The music, yes, there will be a chant with extra rhythm, will linger in the cloister longer than usual. And each mug of beer poured will carry the flavor of labor, devotion, and a little bit of dried fig. You smile to yourself, then quickly wipe it off. Smiling too openly might earn you dish duty. You've reached the best part of the beer's life, the aging. It's the beer's equivalent of a long nap in a dark room after a heavy lunch. You envy it deeply. Today, your task is to tend the barrels as they rest. Quietly, slowly, patiently, in the cool stone cellars beneath the monastery. These rooms are dug deep into the hillside, always 10 degrees cooler than the air above, and they smell like damp earth, old wood, and ancient secrets. There are no windows, no sounds but the occasional drip of condensation. It's like being inside the belly of a sleeping cathedral. You walk between rows of barrels, their rounded bellies stained with rings of foam from past fermentations. Each one is labeled in monk code: chalk markings, notched wooden tags, or, your favorite, a tiny wax seal pressed with a stylized hop flower. Your job isn't exciting. It's not even particularly difficult. You listen, sniff, tap. You gently rap your knuckles against each barrel to hear if the beer is still moving, fermenting, whispering. If the sound is too hollow, it's over-carbonating. Too dull, and something might have gone wrong. Somewhere in between lies perfection. You catch Brother Ambrose leaning over one cask, his ear pressed flat against the wood like he's trying to eavesdrop on the yeast's dreams. You follow suit. The barrel hums faintly, a soft crackle, like parchment shifting in a breeze. You smile. It's alive. Historians still argue whether monks understood the exact science of aging beer or simply trusted the listen, smell, and pray method. Some abbeys documented elaborate storage systems based on moon phases, temperature fluctuations, and the mood of the cellar cats. Quirky tidbit. In one German abbey, it was traditional to leave a single candle burning overnight in the beer cellar, not for light, but to detect gas buildup. If the candle flickered violently or went out, someone had to open a vent. Or, if the monks were feeling superstitious, they'd blame the angry angel of fermentation and do 3 extra psalms at lauds. You carry a small wooden spoon with you, used not for drinking, but for sampling. 1 drop only. just enough to assess the flavor. You approach a barrel marked B14, turn the wooden spigot ever so slightly, and collect a sample. It's beautiful. Warm, malty, smooth. A little sharp around the edges. It's not quite ready, but you can already taste the future. This is Abbey Ale, the kind that pilgrims will write ballads about and monks will serve with faint, humble pride. You make a note on the wooden ledger hanging nearby. 2 days more. Then perfect. You continue the circuit. One barrel has a cracked seal. You mark it for repairs. Another smells too sweet. Possible contamination. You add a sprig of rosemary and say a quiet prayer. Not because rosemary is magic, but because it helps you feel like you're doing something. And then you reach the oldest barrel, the one in the back corner. It's marked simply with a cross and a date, 3 years ago, reserved for the abbot. You've never tasted it. Probably never will. But you touch the side of it gently and whisper a monk's blessing, just in case the beer can hear you. You exit the cellar with chill, stiff fingers and a small smear of yeast on your sleeve. Outside, the sun is warm, and you blink like a mole coming into the light. Another bell rings in the distance. Time for prayers, or lunch, or both. As you walk back through the cloister, you realize something strange. You miss the barrels already. They don't talk. They don't move. But somehow, they've become companions. You've brewed for them, fed them grain and water, given them warmth and cool shadows. And in return, they've grown into something drinkable, beautiful, alive. And soon, they'll wake from their slumber and enter the world, quietly, humbly, with a hint of fig and thyme, twilight. The time when bells soften, candles flicker, and even the cloister feels like it's holding its breath. You've finished your brewing duties for the day. Mash stirred, barrels checked, yeast settled like a cranky cat finally asleep. Now you make your way through the long, cool corridor leading to the refectory, robe brushing the stone floor, footsteps echoing like soft punctuation. The day's nearly done, and that means it's time for Complain, the final prayer of the monastic day, and perhaps more importantly for your aching arms, the evening beer. Tonight, it's feast beer. You helped brew it, remember? The one with the fig and rosemary and that rogue flick of orange zest. It's been tapped and blessed. Not with fanfare, of course, but with a 3-second silent prayer and a very solemn nod from the abbot. You file into the dining hall with the others. The only sounds are the scratch of sandals, the groan of old benches, and the distant croak of a toad who lives under the herb garden and has impeccable comedic timing. You sit, you wait. A monk ladles the dark ale into your mug, carefully, reverently, with the grace of a man who's handled both liturgy and livestock. And then you drink. It's everything you hoped it would be. Sweet at the start, with depth and darkness and just the tiniest floral kiss from the rosemary. The fig softens the edge. The barley gives it warmth. This isn't just beer. It's monastic poetry. Liquid psalms. You're not supposed to sigh. You sigh anyway. Brother Hugo hears it. He doesn't judge. Around the room, eyes close in contentment. One monk raises his mug an inch in gratitude. Another taps a finger 3 times against the wood in a gesture of silent applause. The abbot smiles, barely, which in monk language is the equivalent of a fireworks show. Historians still argue whether monks ever got drunk on feast days or simply became very serene. Truth is, the beer is strong, but not overwhelming. The portion is small. The company is calm. There's no toasting, no singing, no rowdy games. Just quiet satisfaction, sipped between scripture readings. Quirky tradition? In some monasteries, the last drop of beer from each feast keg was poured onto the roots of the cloister's oldest tree as an offering to the earth that gave the grain, a kind of eco-liturgical toast. Your abbey does the same. Brother Thomas carries the wooden ladle outside after the meal and pours it silently beneath the apple tree that leans a little left, like it's eavesdropping on the chapel. As the mugs are collected and cleaned in silence, the monks rise and file out one by one. You follow, stomach warm, limbs heavy. The candlelight along the hallway walls flickers like tired stars. You rub your hands together, grain still under your nails, yeast probably still in your hair, and exhale. You pass by the brew room one last time before bed. It's dark now, still, but you can feel the heartbeat in the air, the rhythm of cooling wort, the slow breath of fermentation, the memory of grain sacks and burst casks and triumphs made of foam. You press your palm against the door for a moment, not for any practical reason, just because. Because tomorrow you'll brew again. You'll fetch water, stir mash, lift barrels, scrub floors. You'll sniff, sip, bless, and repeat. But tonight you've earned your mug, and it tasted exactly like hard work and whispered joy. The final bell of the day rings slowly, each toll spreading like ripples across the stone walls of the monastery. It's not urgent. It doesn't command. It just suggests. You listen, and like the others, you move. You walk back to your cell. It's small, barely wide enough to stretch your arms, but it's yours. A straw-filled mattress, a wooden cross on the wall, and a single candle flickering beside a clay mug of water. You haven't spoken all day, and you're not about to start now. You sit, robe rustling as you settle on the edge of the bed, and let your thoughts simmer. Your hands still carry the scent of barley. Your shoulders still ache from turning the mash. You catch a whiff of yeast rising faintly from your sleeve and smile without meaning to. It's been a long day. But in the monastery, every day is long. And every day ends like this, with quiet, repetition, and a slow exhale into sleep. You think about the beer you helped make, the one the abbot sipped with half a smile, the one the pilgrim child drank with wide eyes, the one you ladled into the roots of the apple tree like an offering. And somehow, the fact that it's not permanent, that it'll be poured, emptied, and replaced, feels like part of its beauty. Monastic life is like that, a cycle. You rise, you pray, you labor, you sleep. You brew beer, you drink beer, you give beer away. You don't chase glory, you don't hoard praise. You do the work over and over again until one day someone else does it after you. That's the point. Historians still argue whether monks found this routine comforting or stifling. But here, now, sitting in the hush of your chamber, you can say, if only to yourself, it's comforting, predictable, sane, sacred. You lie back. The straw rustles. Outside, a night bird calls once. The cloister is silent. The brewhouse is still. The yeast sleeps in its vat. Tomorrow it may bubble again, but for now it's resting, like you. The candle flickers lower. And now, let everything slow now. Let your arms feel heavier, your thoughts softer. The smells of the day, grain, steam, faint wood smoke, drift quietly from your memory like mist through cloister arches. Your legs are warm beneath your robe. Your breath moves gently in and out without needing to do anything at all. The bells are silent now. The barrels are sleeping. The yeast is still. The great stone walls hum softly with age, and the ancient timbers creak only once in a while, like they too are settling in for the night. Whatever burdens your body bore today, whatever you carried, stirred, hauled, or spilled, Leave them now by the door. Let them rest there like empty buckets. You don't need them where you're going. Tonight the world has no need of words, no need of plans. Just breath and time and quiet. You're safe here. You've done enough. The beer will keep. The grain will wait. And the bells, they'll ring again tomorrow. But not yet. Now the candle lowers its flame. The air cools. The sky darkens beyond the stone window, where stars glint like the faintest gold ink in a monk's manuscript. And you are still.